As the first true standalone story in the Star Wars saga, there was a whole lot riding on Rogue One, but the story surrounding the film is almost as interesting as the one we watched on the big screen. From axed cameos to the film's humble beginnings, there's a whole lot more to Rogue One than just Jin's quest to snag the Death Star plans. So let's dig into the untold truth of Rogue One. Unexpected origins. The entire concept for Rogue One came from 2 sentences in A New Hope's opening crawl, but it was a visual effects supervisor for the special editions who had the bright idea to turn those lines into a full-fledged movie. Effects guru John Knoll came up with the pitch when Lucasfilm wanted to do a live-action Star Wars series. But the idea was shelved. When Disney bought the franchise and announced new plans to do standalone stories, Knoll ran the idea past his colleagues, and the blockbuster was born. So at least something good came of those special editions. And despite the fact that the entire movie is based on an opening crawl, it doesn't have one itself, leaping right into the action. But it turns out the first draft of the film actually did have a crawl, until director Gareth Edwards decided to remove it. That's because Rogue One delves into the battle referenced in the introduction to A New Hope. The creative team worried it would be a bit redundant to have an opening crawl for events already recapped in another one. A collage of other movies. The film's editors revealed that the film was sketched out with an unusual approach. Instead of working off a script, they cut footage from hundreds of other movies to follow the scene-by-scene story breakdown in order to figure out exactly how much dialogue the film would actually need. This approach also helped them figure out how long different sequences would take, so they could hash out a more detailed script. On the surface, it feels like a backwards way to make a movie, but it worked out pretty well. Now we'd just like to get our hands on that mock-up reel. Trailer tribulations. Rogue One's reshoots have been reported exhaustively, with scene-by-scene breakdowns of everything that was left out of the final cut of the film. And it's now obvious entire subplots would end up on the cutting room floor. Why did all those early scenes remain in the trailers in the weeks and months leading up to release, long after it was obvious they'd never be in the final cut? According to Edwards, it was a decision made on the marketing side, because the folks cutting those commercials and trailers felt they did a good job of selling the spirit of the film, regardless of the final film story. Now we'll never know if Baze and Chirrut were supposed to kiss. Oh baby. Alan Tudyk and his cut cameo. This one gets a little meta, so just bear with us. Alan Tudyk played the fan-favorite droid K2SO, and wore a motion capture rig to bring him to life. But he also popped up as a pilot in a scene that didn't make it into the final film. The weird part? Tudyk played the cameo role as Ray Nearly, from his hit web series Con Man, where he plays a self-deprecating sci-fi actor bouncing between fan conventions. Ray never has much luck keeping big roles, and it seems even his real-life Rogue One cameo couldn't survive that fictional streak of bad breaks.
Did you know that wasn't me?
In terms of the performance Tudyk was actually hired to portray, the snarky droid is around 7 feet tall, and even though K2SO was created with motion capture and CGI, they still needed Tudyk to be around the droid's approximate height while acting with the rest of the cast. The solution was to put Tudyk on stilts, which he wore for much of the production. It might sound like a hassle, but it sure beats having to wear an entire C-3PO costume, like Anthony Daniels did. When the 2 actors met, Daniels had some choice words for Tudyk.
He said, "Wait a minute, are you wearing an actual robot costume, or are they doing it in motion capture?" I said, "Motion capture." He said, "You."
Everything old is new again. Edwards raided the vaults at Skywalker Ranch and Lucasfilm and discovered unused footage from the first Star Wars film. Keen-eyed fans noticed some familiar faces during Rogue One's final battle. That's because Edwards painstakingly restored some unused alternate shots of the pilots during the Rebels' attack on the Death Star in A New Hope. It's a nod for fans, but it's also one more subtle way that Rogue One enriches the faraway galaxy we know and love. That wasn't the only genuinely vintage thing about the film either. To get the film to sync up with the look of A New Hope, Edwards used the vintage Ultra Panavision 7mm lenses Quentin Tarantino unearthed at Panavision for the filming of The Hateful Eight, and attached them to an ultra high-tech 6K large format camera. It proved a perfect combination of lo-fi and high-tech, and allowed Edwards to strike the same balance that made the original trilogy look so memorable. A new composer. Along with being the first standalone Star Wars film, Rogue One also marked the end of an era for franchise composer John Williams, who has scored every film in the series over the decades. This time around, Edwards opted to bring in Michael Giacchino, who scored films like The Incredibles, the new Star Trek franchise, and Doctor Strange, to provide the soundtrack to Jin's adventure. Giacchino adds enough musical tributes that it still feels like Star Wars, while also setting a different tone. Meanwhile, Williams is set to return for episodes 8 and 9, so we'll get more old-school Star Wars themes pretty soon. Peter Jackson was there. He might be the mind behind one of the biggest genre franchises in history, but even Peter Jackson has to tip his hat when Darth Vader's around. The man behind the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit trilogies happened to be in town when Edwards was directing that epic closing scene when Darth Vader goes berserk on escaping rebel agents. So Edwards gave him a heads up for when he was filming. Jackson ran over immediately to geek out over Vader mowing through a hallway of soldiers. Famous director or not, no one can blame Jackson for going full-on fanboy and basking in Vader's glory.
That's awesome. That sounds so cool.
Thanks for watching. Click the looper icon to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Plus, check out all this cool stuff we know you'll love too.